Thanks everybody for joining. Please use the chat. I am accustomed to live speaking, so the more you all engage, hopefully the more engaging I will be. So with that, let me get my slides up for all of you. So goal for today, I have a QR code here. If you haven't grabbed it, if you like worksheets and organizing your thoughts, definitely take a snapshot of this while the slide is up. It's also pinned into the chat. But the main thing I really want you all to be able to take away is like, how can you really apply thinking about quality to business goals? And it's not the functionality of our products, but it is a necessary component in order to make something compelling. So to kind of get us there, I have a little bit of an agenda. I want to talk about a little bit why it matters, some of the key aspects that I like to focus on, how to set goals, and then also some tips and tricks in there. Now, one thing you might say during all of this is, well, that's just like your opinion, man. And I would highly encourage you to take some of these things as like, oh, that's like a really good idea of what not to do. Or going, oh, that's a really great idea of what to do. My journey may be different than yours. I worked at a set of companies that informed my kind of worldview when it comes to quality. So, take this as information and definitely make it your own and apply it. And if you are having those thoughts, toss them in chat. I'm very happy to take a hard question, or why did you do it that way, or what about this, or even more specific things in the details as we get to the end would be great too. So quick version though of why should you care what I have to say on the matter. I started my career as an electrical engineer, did firmware database work in cars, went up to 3D graphics on phones and the sync system with Ford, did real-time communications at Skype, transitioned the product, worked on a whole bunch of Jelly Bean releases. I think it's like 3 or 4 different versions of Jelly Bean, plus a ton of other desserts after that, up until the desserts kind of ended. And then I hopped over to privacy and wearables for a while. And currently I'm at Grammarly working on the client data, cloud compute, and trust organization. So all the back of the house at Grammarly to make sure Grammarly is a live and helpful AI assistant. So lots of things there. And where I want to kind of start off on is why does it matter? I'm assuming you care to some extent since you're here and you're still listening to me. So that's good. But like, to what extent? How do I convince others in my organization that quality is important? And it's not the point of our products, but it's really important to get it right. You need to be able to measure it if you want to be able to action it and you want to be able to improve it. So I love a good bad metaphor. So let me just start off using restaurants. I won't stick with this the whole time, but like, typically you're going to the restaurant for the food and the drink, maybe a little bit for the ambiance. But no one ever said to their friend like, "Hey, remember that place we went to a few weeks ago? They had great bathrooms. Those bathrooms were fantastic. Oh, so clean. We should go back." No, that's probably not something that's been said before. However, if you went into that bathroom and you are horrified by what you saw, even if the food was good, are you going back? So you're not going to sell your restaurant on the quality of its bathrooms, but definitely your bathrooms can be a liability for your ability to deliver food. Even open kitchens in a restaurant, to a large extent, are about trust and transparency. If it's unclean, if it's disorganized, you're going to be wondering about what it is that you're eating and if it's safe to do so. So that's an important part. But also, like, is it consistent? Is it like, do they have on days and off days, or does it depend whether you're like who the chef is? Are you going to go to a restaurant if you're not consistently sure if you're going to have a good time? Maybe sometimes it's great. Maybe the lows are really bad. I'm sure we've all experienced that. And so it's like, again, it's really how you are delivering that quality. And so this gets into these kind of key aspects of how I like to think about it and how I work with some of my own teams. So first, like, I work at Grammarly, so like grammar, vocabulary. I should probably give some definitions. It feels on point. So the one thing is like quality, right? Thinking about it as like it's the standard, and it's like compared to how other things are, like how good or bad something is. It's kind of intrinsically relative as a concept. And there's four pieces here. One is like the core value of itself, like in the restaurant example, the food. What is it that your users want from the product? What problem are you addressing? And understanding like your ability to deliver that value. Other one is experience. So like your order time, your wait time, your ordering experience and your wait time. Like, how do users get access to the value? Are there hurdles? Are there things preventing them from being able to access the value? Because the value might be great when you get it, but maybe the app crashes all the time and it prevents you from engaging with the value. Predictability is often, I think, overlooked, but like how consistently are you able to deliver then that experience and those values? The consistency of the food, variability of the wait time. Maybe it's usually really fast, except when it's not. And the last one is about sustainability. And this is like it's easy to be the best at something in general, like air quotes, easy. If you don't worry about cost, if you don't worry about complexity, you can, like all of us, could probably make amazing and compelling products. The trick is you need to do so with an adequate staff. You have to do so within a cost budget if you're thinking about restaurants. That's much harder. So I'm done with the restaurant metaphor. Let's kind of pivot a little bit here into like digging into each of these components. And to talk about it, I'm going to focus really on battery life on Android. I spent a good part of my life working on battery life and performance issues, and informed a lot of my own thinking based on a combination of successes, but maybe more importantly, the failures. And then ultimately, like how I was able to succeed in improving battery life on the platform, not just me, but with the team. So the big one here is like think about value. So the being able to use your phone when you want to, kind of like the point, right? You have a phone on your device, you want to be able to use it. You don't want to feel pressure that it's not going to be there for you. Battery anxiety is real, and looking at then how we're able to deliver that value. If you're not having good battery life, then people don't use their phone as much, and if they're not using their phone as much, well, if you're at Google, phone usage roughly equals money, right? The more people are using the phone, the more apps they're buying, the more searches they're doing, the more ads they're clicking, and so that is a kind of a relationship between the two. But it's not necessarily the point of a phone. You don't buy, like, it's easy to have great battery life if you don't worry about any of the actually doing anything with your phone. Also, if you have questions, toss them in the chat. I'm going to call it out a few more times, but toss those questions in the chat as we're going through this. Otherwise, I might end earlier than I want. So the big other thing here is the user experience. So as I mentioned, like it's kind of easy to get battery life if you really want to. Make the screen really dark, underclock the CPU, the processor. Keep the radio off so nothing is updated. You don't get phone calls. Your apps are out of date. You don't get instant messages, but your battery life, mwah, it'll be absolutely amazing. So there's trade-offs. Obviously, that's not a great strategy. That kind of undermines the entire point of the phone. So thinking about those trade-offs and what are the things, what are the guardrails to be worrying about? And I'll come back to guardrails a little bit later. But looking at like what are the clear goals in terms of your experience and what are the clear guardrails that you want to have in there. That balance is going to be where success kind of lies, and identifying like what are those key user experiences in your product that you're looking to protect and you're looking to make sure are high quality. Next one is predictability. So sticking with battery life, predictability I feel is incredibly important, not just for battery life, but really in everything about our products. If your phone is fantastic, like every day, but then like once a month, it completely lets you down, are you going to be comfortable with that? Now, if your phone is like predictable in the sense of like, hey, I'm going to binge playing Pokemon Go for the next few hours, and I know my battery life is going to be poor. If your phone tells you it's going to be poor because it sees you using Pokemon Go, or you get a suggestion to turn on battery saver, and like you may still want to have better battery life from an absolute perspective, but now you know how to work with it. Even if your phone is consistently dying at a certain time of day, if you know that's the case and it's consistent that it always gets you to there, you can work around that. I'm sure there's lots of products in our lives that we enjoy, but we know they have downsides. There's caveats, there's known issues. But if you know what they are, you can typically work around them, especially if it's time bound. So being able to understand like what are those points and how variable and how predictable is your product. Crashes to me are a great example of this. Like they're not predictable for end users. If there's certain behaviors that you use in a product and it causes issues, you're gonna have a bad time. And customers are going to then not rely on that product as much, and they may change their behaviors and either avoid certain parts of your application that might be unstable. Maybe those are important growth areas, or they'll just bail entirely and go to another product that maybe doesn't have the same functionality, but they know it consistently works. There's many metaphors here. I won't get too political, but like about self-driving cars and a number of other products that fall into this category of the differences between a highly predictable product that needs to be there every time, and if not, it really undermines the story, as well as cases where like having some variability is actually okay. Last one I'll get to here, coming back around, is sustainability. And this one's like inward facing. It's meant to, like, very rarely is developing a high quality product like a one and done that you go, like, hey, I did some work on it. I'm there. Quality is now achieved. Let's go work on something else. No, you're going to have to keep on it. And so it's as you're building that quality strategy, as you're doing the quality work, you also have to be thinking about how are you going to sustain all those hard-earned gains. That ranges from automated testing and functional testing, like at the time that engineers are committing code. It ranges to production alerting, setting thresholds, and on calls to make sure that if something shifts in production, you know. And then it also is like, and this is, I think, an oft overlooked one, is end to end behavioral testing in your product. So, like looking at things like asynchronous testing that just runs in an open loop, day of use or a day in the life of a user using that product, making sure that all these key moments are working. Yes, Q&A can help you for this, but and they should be helping you for this. But building test plans, asking engineers of like, how do you validate and know before something goes out? How do you know it's good? And if you're getting surprised in production, how do you know that there's a production issue before your customers come and tell you? Concrete example, even in my job this week, I have enterprise customers asking about Grammarly quality issues coming through the customer support flow. Not ideal. That's a gap in our alerting that we didn't pick up on an issue, and we had to wait for our customer to tell us. And that really undermines your overall story. So coming back to mobile, you can look at then on battery life, like you're looking at, do app developers, do OS developers at Google have the tools they need? They can say, hey, be more efficient, use less battery. You go, cool. Have you given me tools to understand that? Are you tracking when I commit code if my component or if my application is consuming more battery than it should or than I expect it to? If the answer is no, you're gonna have a bad time. People are just gonna be really upset because they're being held to a standard that they don't have a sustainable way to ensure they meet. So all of this has been, this slide's going to do a lot of work for me. This has been the build up to getting to this slide, which is a heavy lift. So the idea here is we want to take a high level set of qualitative goals. So like things like that are like about your product, how you want the user experience to be. It can be informed by user research. It can be informed by feedback directly from your users. It can be informed by product insights from yourself or from your teams. But those things are inherently qualitative. We need to get them to be quantitative. This way we can measure them. We can set goals against them. We can track our progress. We can see regressions. So the big thing here is it's hard to measure things. And so I'm going to call out specifically proxy and composite metrics are really important to be thinking about and how you measure and how you take a concept and turn it into something that's measurable. Proxy metrics are like, it's something that is almost what you're looking for. It's not exactly the thing, but you're pretty sure, hey, when this thing moves, I'm pretty sure that's going to affect the experience overall for my product. So I need to make sure I have eyes on it. Composite is you might take a number of different signals and bring them together. In the case of battery life, you have two different ways roughly a phone operates. The screen is on and I'm typing it, or the screen is off and it's sitting down on the desk next to me. The battery life of those two states is important, and each one has very different properties because the phone is behaving very differently. The CPU is spun up when the screen is on. The screen is on, which is a huge battery drain. They're different. If you just mush them together and don't care about the difference, you're going to have a bad time because it doesn't help you understand what's going on. And if you break them apart, you can start to see more of an understanding of what's happening. So this is how I kind of set goals from that broad statement, which is like good battery life, to the components. The first thing is you need a success statement. In this model, this is a very simplified one. I've done one each. But here you're going to have a very focused piece of, can users confidently depend on the phone for an important task? That's like the key thing. That you want to inspire confidence that then users are using that phone as a payment device, like, and they're not carrying a credit card. They're using it as a car key. They're putting the plane ticket on it. You got to make sure the phone's there for them. Otherwise, these types of features, no one's going to use them. So that is getting that scoping right and getting like the abstraction and level of that statement and that people agree with it is really important. You should have a lot of confidence in that statement because then once you have it, you can start breaking it down into these four different categories. I may go to that. I see a question here. Would you split? Let me talk. I'll pause a moment in my talk. Would you split qualitative and quantitative 50-50 when making decisions on what to build, or would you sway more towards one? Ooh. Um, I don't know if I would put it as percentages. I think you need both. I guess I think about it as I split it as I want really high level qualitative statements that ground it because like those are like the experiences, the things that you want to be true, and making sure that those are qualitative and that we can all agree like yes, that sounds right. The next one is then how do I map that qualitative thing to a quantitative thing? So it's not so much like is the ratios. Like if you have any qualitative statement, you're going to need quantitative things to back it up. Otherwise, I don't know how you would actually measure or know other than feelings as to like are you meeting that qualitative statement? And when you think about like risk and things like that, I kind of jokingly say like people are really awful judges of risk at all stages of life and at all scales, be it personal of like, should I eat this bag of potato chips right now because I'm a little sad? Is like a risk decision, and that people, including myself, are not necessarily great at making, all the way up to things like global warming and larger economic societal things. We're bad at managing risk. So the best way to do it to me is like get numbers, set goals on those numbers, track those numbers. Don't go off the feelings, go off the numbers, but start with them because feelings are important, and this is about perception. So hopefully that answers. You can give me a thumbs up, or you can follow up and say you didn't answer my question in the chat. But coming back to these four, the first one I'll start with is ultimate impact, and this is like meant to be like a very high level statement that helps like, well, if we have this, users are confidently depending on their phone, like what's ultimately needing to be true here. And at the time, I defined this as like 90% of our users do not see a low battery warning after 18 hours of use. So you've used it for pretty much like a day, and the majority of your users are very confidently not seeing low battery warning because when you see that low battery warning on your phone, you're like, I shouldn't use my phone very much. My phone's kind of letting me down. So you don't want to get to that low battery warning. That's when user behavior starts to change because they see that there's like either a red outline or a bar. So that's our ultimate impact. We want to make sure users don't see that. So then you go, okay, that's cool, but that's really hard to like action. A lot of things go into that. So like, what are the drivers? What are the things that we can very concretely measure that we can set very explicit goals on that then engineering, that product leads can focus on? So like an example here is the screen off battery. So when the screen is off, how much battery am I consuming is less than 10% of the overall battery consumption of the device. So that's kind of saying like, if you're not engaging with your phone, it's off. That's not value. So we want to minimize that. However, being up to date, getting refreshes, being able to respond to messages, to phone calls is important. So we kind of eyeballed it and said, yeah, 10% sounds right. The rest should be spent on like the screen is on and I am happily engaging on my phone. Coming back to then guardrails. Guardrails are really important to have in here because a guardrail is going to ensure that in that push of those drivers, you don't break other things that are important about the experience. And typically for me, this really usually boils down to two givens: one, latency, and the other one, frame rates, like animation speeds and behavioral speeds, interactivity. So this one here is looking at like your P95, so your 95th percentile. UI frame rate is greater than 60 frames per second. Long ago at Android, there was a project called Butter, amazing product name or team name. But it was to have everything be buttery smooth. And so that's 60 frames per second minimum. And so looking at those things and making sure, like, are you hitting it? Because again, like it's easy to make the battery life great if you slow down frame rates, you don't draw very much, you lower the brightness. So this holds us accountable to making sure we're still hitting good battery use overall, low in the background, still high performance when you're using it. And then the last one is context, which usually raises some eyebrows. But the idea of a context metric is it's something that you'd probably have to have eyes on, that you have to know about, but you don't necessarily know what good is or what bad even necessarily is. I will pick like insert social media app name here. Let's say that social media app is using 50% of the battery life of the device. Is that good or bad? I don't know. But I do know, it's important to understand what are the primary applications on my phone consuming battery life. And if I don't know that, it makes it very hard for me to then make more informed decisions. I also know if that suddenly that number changes and I didn't do anything to make it change, that's probably super interesting. So maybe over time, I might develop an opinion about that application or other applications, and then start to set goals around it and move it from a context metrics and kind of graduate it to a driver or a guardrail, maybe even an ultimate impact. But it's good to capture them because it keeps you honest for those things. Another example, when I used to work on privacy, I would use often is like, what percentage of our users should say yes to a consent? Should it be 100%? Someone in the product team is like, yeah, 100% of users always say yes to all consents. Okay, that's cool. It's probably not correct. It means like either the user probably doesn't explain something, or what you're asking for is relatively benign. But most likely users don't understand what they're saying yes to. But the opposite extreme is also wrong. Users always say no. Well, obviously that's bad. So somewhere between 100% and 0% is what success looks like. Super helpful. I didn't want to set a goal for the team on like what percentage of users should say yes. That feels like the wrong way to approach it. It really should be about understanding. Does the user make an informed decision? Is the user's decision correct for them and their privacy needs? That's the right thing to goal off of. The percentage of users who say yes or say no is a byproduct. You should know the answer, but you're not necessarily setting a goal. One thing I want to call out, this is probably most important slide. I have a whole thing against North Star metrics. Hashtag sorry, not sorry. But like they're really appealing. They're very simple. Like there's a thing, you can say the thing and say like, let's go get thing. But they're really easily gameable. I find they tend towards vanity metrics. Vanity metric being like a metric that actually doesn't mean anything from a business perspective, but it sure sounds nice. So like an easy example of this is like how many user accounts have been created for my application. That's a great vanity metric because it always goes up. You're only looking at like how many accounts were created. That's not necessarily helpful. Even MAU, like monthly active users, I think is more of a vanity metric than an actually like useful business or engineering product metric. I find having a multi-aspect system, those four categories of ultimate impact, drivers, guardrails, and context, creates tension in the system, right? You're pushing on a high level goal. There's things you want to move forward. There's things you want to protect, and you're creating healthy tension in the organization to achieve them. And it also allows different teams, like your value drivers, your feature development teams, to have a place in the framework, but also your infrastructure teams to have a place in the framework, and that they understand like what are their roles and how does it all fit together. On that note, on a shift now to like that. That's everything you need to know for the framework. That's roughly my approach. Is that, let me just back up real quick. This slide is the heavy lift. If you look at the template that was shared, you will see like it asks these questions, it walks you through it, and this is like the basis for it. So the rest of this, I'm going to give you some stories and some examples of moments in time where I was successful or failed at this, that are really about culture and like this meme here being like your teams potentially probably like yeah sure quality but why, like haven't you heard about shipping features? So how do we navigate this? And it's a balancing act, because I want to sort of reiterate how important it is. Quality is not the point of our products. You're not going to quality your way into growth. It needs to be value, like the user benefit pushing it forward. So let's jump into a few key learnings that I have over the years. Also, I'm still looking at the chat. So Richard, thank you for doing your first question to break it open. But others, feel free, jump in or ask more about these stories, because hopefully they're interesting for you. So first one, develop a hypothesis. You're probably going to be wrong, so invalidate it and then try again. My example of this was Android and wake clocks and background battery. I'm gonna get a little nerdy for a moment and describe what is a wake lock on a phone and why we kind of flubbed it the first time around. So a wake lock on a mobile device prevents the CPU from going to sleep, keeps it awake. So if the screen is off, but an application is holding the screen on, the wake lock keeps the CPU running so it can finish doing compute and things like that. In early versions of Android, any application on your phone could hold on to a wake lock. and they could hold it pretty much indefinitely. And if you're holding it indefinitely, well, that means your CPU is never sleeping. And if your CPU is never sleeping, you're constantly pulling battery. Fixed it, solved it. So I reduced the number of wake locks. If we reduce the number of wake locks, we will reduce the CPU usage states, and battery life will get better. Sweet. End of story. Did a bunch of work. Fixed it. Wake lock usage went down like a lot. Awesome. Like that. This is before I had the driver framework, as I mentioned before. However, battery life was pretty much the same. Uh-oh. Why? And there's a few things that we neglected and that we made assumptions on, and we didn't make good hypotheses and invalidated them. We just jumped right into it. And the thing was, well, if any one wake lock hold the CPU on, if much of your device actually had like two or more wake locks active, and you went from say 3 wake locks active to 1 wake lock active, that actually makes absolutely no difference to the system performance. The CPU was on before, CPU is still on, no difference. We didn't set a goal on concurrent wake locks and getting it to 0. We set a goal on absolute number of wake locks. Get the subtlety? Other one was we didn't realize that this was a time when big cores and little cores on phones were still new, and we weren't being clever about leveraging when to use the big core. Like big cores run at high, they have lots of compute, they have larger, higher clock cycles, they're bigger, so you consume more watts, and they should really only be on when the screen is on. The small cores, those are the ones you want to use when the screen is off, and we were not being smart about it. We were still spinning up big cores. Oh, that's where a lot of savings was. That's where the battery was going. They cost a lot to spin it up. They cost a lot to spin down, and when they're running, they're expensive too. So that kind of like challenged our assumptions about what we had built and what we had done. We also this then triggered a bunch of other theories and hypotheses in the product about like the total amount of work we're doing off battery, and how to make sure like, hey, it's actually not really like if you're unplugged for 18 hours, it's really about the total work over the day. Even if you spread it out and peanut butter it everywhere, you still ate the whole jar of peanut butter. Again, I mentioned I love a good bad metaphor. So you spread it all out, it's still the same jar if you eat it in like 5 minutes or you eat it throughout the day. So really going like, how do we actually consume less peanut butter? How do we delay work until you're back on power? This kind of concept and the measurements around it led to the feature Extreme Battery Saver, which then became a feature on Android and Pixel phones, and I think is available on pretty much everything nowadays. And it came to that idea of like, we actually need to reduce the overall work happening, and that's what Extreme did. Next one I had was, and this one I talk about all the time in my teams, is known bads. So a known bad is a thing that you know to be bad. The reason of this is knowing what's good is really hard. And people tend to argue over what is good or what is acceptable. So starting with things that are clearly bad, like you have the high ground, no one's going to push you on saying, oh no, that's okay. So like, let's look at wake locks again. So wake locks are actually important. You could just say, well, hey, Ben, why don't you just get rid of wake locks? Well, one of the reasons they're important is if you take a photo on your phone, click, and now I turn my phone immediately off. Screen's off now. If that app is not holding a wake lock, the phone might shut down and turn off. What if you're running AI processing? What if the file hasn't been saved to disk yet? What if you want to make sure all your photos are backed up? That wake lock ensures that work is happening. So it is important for an application to be able to use them. So it's a little nuanced. But if I take a step back and think about a known bad, well, if an app or service hasn't been used in 24 hours, full day has gone by, and that app is holding a wake lock after 24 hours since last use, is that okay? Everyone's like, no, Ben, like that's not okay. Like that's trivial. Like, of course, that's bad. There's no reason that it needs to be holding a wake lock 24 hours after usage. I'm like, cool, that's great. Oh, by the way, that happens like every day for 90% of phones in the wild. Oh, okay. So now we know what to fix. Suddenly, this thing is now like something that we know we have to address, and it gets the ball rolling. It gets people engaging on it. As you went through in that investigation, you start to uncover more things. So it's really about getting like the ball rolling down the hill. And that's how I usually start it, is focus on some things that you just know to be bad. No one's going to come at you for saying these are bad. get some numbers on it, get some data on it. And most likely you're going to find out your assumption or the team's assumption was wrong. I also will talk about the rule of cockroaches, or Ben's rule of cockroaches, which is roughly, if I see a cockroach in my house, I'm sure there's more. There's not just like, oh, no, no, Ben, you just saw like one. It's fine. Like there's totally not cockroaches in your wall. Sorry if you're getting like triggered by cockroaches, but that is not when you see one, you know there's more. And so again, like thinking on the known bads, like what are those things where even if you see a single proof point, you know it's indicative of a larger issue and larger change in your product. And that's another good place to start to get momentum, to get buy-in from leads. Next one on here is quality and top line metrics business goals. So it's really desirable to say, hey, Ben, like to what extent is this thing going to like actually matter? Like how much money is it going to create? Because that's like kind of the goal, or how much engagement, or will it bring more nows, or will it bring improve retention? Those are all like things that make a lot of sense to want to understand. But there's that kind of feature of this chart that when you think about quality is like, are or aren't your needs being met? And depending on where your product is sitting, and if you do experiments and you do measures, are you crossing the boundary or not of this like middle big wins? Or are you purely in the needs aren't met yet, or purely in the diminishing returns area? It can kind of give you the wrong signal, and it can kind of backfire or even set you back as your organization. So like if you run an A/B experiment and your A and B are both in the red, well, you're not going to find a lot of movement. Like you weren't meeting needs. Like let's say your battery life is 5 hours. We made an A/B test. Battery life is now 6 hours. Is that meeting the bar for anybody? Probably not. So you'd see you could do that experiment and say, look, like battery life doesn't matter, clearly. Like we added an hour. I think as a percentage, it's a huge lift, right? 20% improvement in battery life, and no one cared. Well, you weren't above the threshold of meeting users' needs. So of course, it's not going to make a difference. Conversely, if you are crossing entirely the green from one to the other, you might think, whoa, battery life is the best thing ever. Who cares about features? Just make battery life better. Well, that's going to get into the diminishing returns really quick. And then the true is opposite on the other end. If you're already good, then you might think like, well, no one really cares. It's good, and we're maintaining this goodness for no particular reason. It's like, no, as long as you stay in that yellow area, you'll be fine. So make sure you find where those inflection points are. The best example I have of this in the product industry is Apple and the Apple Watch. Apple Watch has 18 hours. Huh, funny how that same number came up again. 18 hours as their nominal battery life, and then a 36-hour low power mode. Many people do kind of complain that like 18 hours is not enough, or I wish it was longer, but they understand where the curve is. And it's roughly at 18 hours. And so that's what they've targeted. And they've made sure that their watches are very reliably, it's not like they're just hitting 18. They're very reliably hitting that 18-hour threshold, especially in the first few years of their life. So that is like a very conscious decision on understanding to what end does that level of quality drive and enable their product. Because the Apple Watch is effectively a small phone miniaturized onto your watch, and they want it to be heavy on compute and have graphics and have all these great things that drive awareness. They're not trying to compete with Garmin. The contrast, who has a much longer battery life, but a very different value proposition in terms of what they're creating. Next one I have is don't try to police and prevent regressions. This will seem really counterintuitive because like usually you'd say we got some data, we got some metrics, we see some things that are bad, we see some known bads, they're obviously bad. Ben already told us they're bad. I see they're bad. So we should like not ship bad, right? Well, it's tough. Like not shipping, if I'm sure everybody's like experienced a thing where you have a piece of value, a new feature, a new capability that you want to get out into the market, and you know something's like a little off, but you're like, it's probably still like worth it. Sometimes orgs need to learn that and calibrate, and sometimes that's the right decision. Like if you always wait until everything is perfect, you probably waited too long. And in the beginning, your metrics are gonna be kind of flaky on you. You're not gonna have a lot of confidence. When you have a new metric, they're almost always wrong. But you need to use them to improve them. And so this is kind of like the balancing act is really push on let's know. Measuring needs to be the bar. So you're not blocking on, oh, there's clearly a regression here. I'm going to try and like stop the launch. If it's really bad, yeah, maybe you should. But when it's in like the fuzziness, the bar in the beginning is we need to make sure we know that we are regressing and to how much, to tracking those known bads, to having a ledger, of those decisions that we made, so that 6 months from now, when we go back and we see user retention slipping, potentially, you can go like, hey, we made a bunch of decisions here of feature versus quality trade-offs. Let's go do something about it. You want to make sure you have that like evidence of those things and you have that tracking, because on the whole, as people are tracking this stuff, are seeing these then regressions in the systems, are seeing the number of known bad events, people will start to organically care about it. And this is what I've largely found, and I'll talk about this one in a moment on the culture piece. Is the best thing I can say is get yourself dirty with data. Like, because if you don't have data scientists, convince the powers that be to get data scientists. Become their friends. Learn Postgres or SQL. Get comfortable using tools. I'm not going to name any companies, but there's a few different companies out there that make really good tools and infrastructure to go dumpster diving through live data, through analytics, through assessments. Like, get comfortable. LLMs have gotten really good at writing queries, so don't be afraid. Go do it. Ask questions to why that is. Those questions, when they're coming from a place of curiosity, will result, I think, in a good engagement, and will slowly but surely start to say like, oh, yeah, this thing that we shipped like a month ago, it actually had a regression in it. We knew it at the time. We shipped it anyways. And then we saw some of these metrics slipped. Oh, now when the customers are upset, we actually knew this. We just didn't pay attention last time. You don't have to say I told you so. It will happen. Is like people want to make a good quality product on the whole. So if you have that data and you can point at it and say, actually, like, the metrics did tell us this last time. We just thought the trade-off was worthwhile, but it wasn't. Great. The right thing's going to happen. So because I'll just tell you, like, being the person who's blocking launches and showing up and saying, oh no, you didn't meet the testing for this, you didn't do these things, it's a tough gig. But if your premise is like, hey, you don't even know whether your product works properly or not, that's the high ground, right? That's the whole point of the meme. Have the high ground. So the last one here is curiosity and knowing. So a quick thing at Grammarly today, I have a meeting for our client teams. We cover hot topics. It's a weekly. I actually had it this morning. It's an hour long, but it's very active. We work through all the top projects, like all the kind of common things you do. But the first part of that meeting, the first 10 minutes, is data science, and they're sharing whatever they think is interesting. I don't pre-read it. I don't check it ahead of time. They show up and they have the floor for 10 minutes to talk about whatever is insightful, whatever trend they're seeing is happening in the industry or in our own product. And we discuss it live. Sometimes there's an action item, sometimes not. But almost every time we're learning something new about the product and the way our users engage with the product. And so like that kind of usually pushes, like, at least for myself and many times my PMs on my teams, to start asking more questions. So I also will then produce documents myself that like highlight things that I've learned or things that I see odd in a table. It's like, hey, I saw this like dip or bump in our project or in our metrics online. Like, why? We had a metric that we track as a quality metric, and it got better when we had an outage. And I'm like, why is this quality metric getting better when we have an outage? That probably means something is off. You don't always need a smoking gun. So highlighting like, this is an unknown, this is something odd, and asking the team, like, do we know why? And like, if not, let's go find out. You want to pace it. You don't want to like inundate people with it. But I think finding this like idea of like, when you see something odd, like, let's understand it. There's almost always something to learn. Computers are more complex than humans can imagine, in terms of like, we only can think about how they work, not how they, actually work. And that's like, to me, like where building these metric frameworks is really important to understand. Because if you know how these things are structured in terms of data, in terms of what's happening, in terms of testing, you're going to be in a good place. If you're relying on yourself or an architect or a set of architects to say, oh, here's how it should work, well, it's going to be really hard when you're having an outage, when you're seeing regression in your product, because how you think it works and how it actually works are almost always different. And the gap between that only increases over time. So building these things out early is really important. And I'll give my last one as a thing that I did. It was a little dangerous in my career, so I'm not going to entirely say you should do this, but just to make the point, on battery life and performance long ago, I wheeled out a big screen and set it up, and it tracked all of the performance metrics and battery metrics of our devices in production. It was not a pretty chart. It was not to show off how great the team was at their execution of this. It was to highlight the gap. and the chasm from what we felt was good to where we were today. And it made it very clear because every time someone went and visited the VPs or the VPs came in or out of their office, they saw that chart. I generally have a healthy disregard for my own career. So like that's where I don't necessarily recommend you do that. But the point is like it's making a statement and it's like you yourself walking the walk and saying like, we need to know. Because they'd say like, oh, Ben, are you going to block these launches for the phone? I'm like, no, I'm not blocking it. Like, hey, VP, are you comfortable with these regressions? And they go, no, I'm not particularly comfortable. I'm like, good. So how do we make you comfortable? And then the right things start to happen because it's a very different way of me showing up and saying, I'm going to try and block these launches to saying, I'm just going to make us recognize that we're sometimes our own worst enemy. And then you learn and then you get better. And if you're hiring well, hiring smart people who care about the products they're building, you're going to be fine. So with that, I'm going to call it the end. I always like to add with Finn. But I will kind of flip it. Richard, again, thank you for your question. But if anyone else has questions, we're about 45-ish minute mark, so it's about on time. But I'm here for another 15 minutes. If you got questions, hit it up in the chat. Happy to answer it. Otherwise, we'll call it a day. And please engage with me on LinkedIn. If you don't like to do it here, hit me up. With that, I think we're there. So I'll awkwardly pause for a moment while the chat is running. And if nothing comes up in the next 30 seconds or so, we'll call it an event. Thanks all for your time. Oh, Richard, that's another great question. Thank you, James, as well. And Richard, I should make sure I can slip you a 20 or something later. Yeah, I have a few PMs, and actually one of my greatest PMs was a non-technical PM on Android who is now leading OS work at Meta, and like in a very technical role, and was not technical themselves. Like obviously, I'm technical, but it doesn't require it. So the best thing is like I feel today is the best point in time like in history to at least so far to learn technology, and that is like to lean in the tools. And I will name drop a company here, but like I'm not being paid by them, and I'm not anything like that. But like Cursor or Windsurf are like tools that enable you to use an LLM for coding, and leveraging them to help like bootstrap and develop projects. Building things is the best way to learn, in my opinion. This screen showing art. I built this thing myself. I make coffee scales. I make random doodads where I do my own firmware and I do my own like web backends, and it just forces me to learn the new stacks and new capabilities. So build something. There's lots of tools and things online, but I think picking stuff out and making a web app or a native app. I'm big on web services. I think they're easier to get stood up right now, and there's a lot of cool technologies. But is getting mixed up with that. The other one is being comfortable to try a thing. I did this recently with one of the folks on my team. Is we're like, hey, we want to go build the desktop version of Grammarly on our local machines, and the engineer was like, why do you want to build Grammarly on your own personal machine? Senior director of product, nervously they asked. And like it was because like I wanted to be able to have a copy and know how it worked and what the experience of doing it was. And I learned a ton. We use a service called Artifactory, and I'm like, I had never used it before, and I learned a bunch about how that service is used to distribute builds and distribute artifacts throughout the company. I'm like, sweet, learned something new about the day-to-day life of an engineer. The engineering team also realized they had issues in their onboarding docs, and so now they're fixing them. So it's just do a thing, pick something, and stick with it. Put some time in. So it's not necessarily an exciting way to do it, but I do find like picking a thing and building it. And on the other end, you might have something cool. My current random thing is I'm making a shopping list for my wife and I that syncs live between us when we go shopping. We don't accidentally buy two things of cheese, which has happened before when we both went to Costco and both bought Parmesan cheese. We had too much cheese. It's a very simple problem, but again, it forced me to learn a bunch of things on databases and live sync to modernize how I used to think about this stuff 10 years ago to how technology has moved forward. You don't have to be an engineer to do it. So go for it. LLMs are really awesome in that regard. Shreya, thank you. Grammarly is focused on AI-driven products. What have been some of your biggest learnings and thoughts around building products that leverage generative AI? Ooh, yeah, great question. I have, I think, been accused once or twice of being like anti-AI in some contexts. The reason being is I'm like, AI is a method. It's not the the output. And I think feel like sometimes companies have gotten like mixed up on that. It's one of the reasons like I'm biased. Like I like Grammarly. Is Grammarly is a product that solves I think a very tangible problem for people. Like if you're English as a second language and Grammarly is helping you communicate with confidence to larger groups of people because you feel like you're speaking more natively, that's fantastic. The fact that we use AI has nothing to do with that value proposition. Maybe it makes somebody more excited, like on the who's like doing a funding round or VC money. Like, yeah, you want to hear AI, but it's really like what's the best method? If cascading if statements make a compelling product, do that. It's cheaper. There's no bonus points for being fancy. And I feel like the industry, like because of right now, it's just everybody wants to say AI. Agents is another term that everybody's talking about. And while very interesting, and I think there are real merits to those ideas, like I think from engineering perspective, I look at it as like, what's the simplest way to solve a problem, and do it that way. If the simplest way to solve the problem actually requires AI, fantastic, go do it. If the simplest way to solve a problem doesn't require AI, don't. Go wait, like, solve that one and move on, and solve the other problems that can only be solved with AI. With AI, because there are a lot of problems that are only solvable with AI, but I find a lot of times we kind of mix the two up. So that's been my like, I didn't have the same level of conviction on that, and so I often am asking like, does this really need AI? Or my joke being like, can cascading if statements also solve this problem? Just traditional heuristic logic, and if so, go do that first. And sometimes that gets you 90% of the way there. AI might get you like the gap, but is it worth it? So that's always a thing I ask to help like avoid us being fancy. Because yeah, there's no points for that. All right, thanks, Shreya. James, my app tends to be having to do point releases nearly every week because things get caught too late. Yeah, any tips to navigate this type of recurring issue? We strive for automation testing as the answer, but I'm not convinced it's the answer. Cue weekly circular discussion. Yes. Automated testing does help. I do think it has a place. The best way I can describe it is layers of defense. Similar to security, you're not going to have one thing catch it. So like let's just stack up 90% accurate systems. Like 90% like catches 90% of your issues, catches 90% of your issues, catches 90% of your issues. Well, what's on the other end? Like that's fantastic, right? 90%, 90%, 90%. You're going to be hanging out at like a 99.9-ish like range of like accuracy if you're able to catch 90% of your issues through each layer, through just the 3-layer system. So to me, it's like dog food. If you have the luxury of working on a product or a service that your own company and your employees can use, make sure they're using it. Track it. I have a tracker for like who at Grammarly is using our iOS client, because it typically doesn't get a lot of usage. So I want to make sure like, are people using it? Because if people aren't using it, we're not catching bugs. We're relying on the engineering team. We're relying on me to catch it. So you want dog food happening. Automation testing is also really good. That helps quite a lot. The other one though is as long as you're catching it post launch, make sure that the teams are doing postmortems, and make sure at those postmortems there is a clear how do we prevent this from happening next time, and follow up on that. Take that item, whatever it is, how do we prevent this from happening next time? Put it on the roadmap. Like put it as a conscious thing. We said we'd do this. That will build up the infrastructure, because that's really kind of about it. Like you're not going to solve it by saying institute automated testing. I would agree with you. But as that culture of like, hey, every time we have a regression in the product, we're having a meeting to discuss what we would do differently, and then we actually action that, your system will get better. And so that combination of you're doing more dog fooding, you're doing more testing prior to launch, like either via automated testing, unit testing, day in the use testing, or even like a beta, which we do in some cases. But the other one is like in prod, when the thing goes out, if you have a regression, as long as you know and you take an AI to address it, that will close the loop. So think about how long is that loop. That's the other one I would say. If your learning loop is 2 quarters long, it's going to take a real long time to get better, right? If it takes 2 hours, 2 quarters to learn a lesson, right? We launch a thing, and then two quarters later, we learn whether that thing was actually good or not. You're going to have a bad time. So the shorter you can make that loop, like it's a week that you ship something and you know whether the thing that you shipped was good or not, your time to learn is going to be much better, and your organization will mature. So that's kind of the way to do it. So I do think it is like I'll consider all of those things, but there's not going to be one magic one. Think about it as layers, and being partial coverage is fine. Monkeys was a thing that I don't know if we still do monkeys in tools, but it was a thing that we just have a system just touch the screen and just literally just do this constantly until something would crash. Is that like indicative how users use the product? No, but every time it catches it, that's a legit crash. That's instability. Go fix it. It's layers of protection. So, all right, I think we're just about there, unless there's one more question. But thank you, James, for the question. Automated testing is something that, yeah, even in my team, I am pushing automated testing, but it's also because other parts of our system I think are mature enough to be ready for it. Going once, going twice. Thank you all for sticking along for the time. It was a big time investment during the middle of the day for many. So have a good one. Thanks, everybody.